going back into Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte on chapter 26. It's where the scandal begins.
Sophie came at 7 to dress me. She was very long indeed in accomplishing her task, so long that Mr. Rochester, grown, I suppose, impatient of my delay, sent up to ask why I did not come. She was just fastening my veil, the plain square of blonde after all, to my hair with a brooch. I hurried from under her hand as soon as I could. Finally, we arrived at the church. The ceremony began, and a stranger runs in, stating, "The ceremony is quite broken off. I am in a condition to prove my allegation. An insuperable impediment to this marriage exists. It simply consists in the existence of a previous marriage. Mr. Rochester has a wife now living." "Who are you?" he asked of the intruder. He introduced himself as Briggs, and Mr. Rochester inquired who this wife is, and Mr. Briggs replied, "It is Bertha Mason, who lives in the attic." To prove it, Mr. Mason, Bertha's brother, steps forward. Finally, the wedding is halted, and the guests go home to see Bertha and see her state of mind. Everyone is extremely upset about this, including Jane. Mr. Rochester seems extremely angry.
Oh my god, Mr. Rochester has another wife? I can't believe he'd even do that to Jane. Well, I wonder what's going to happen.
I know, she can't even be considered a wife in the mental state that she's in.
Yeah.
The group sees Bertha, and she reacts violently and attempts to strangle Rochester. The group is frightened by her crazed demeanor. As Rochester looks at her disdainfully, he admits he wants a normal, loving wife, which he found in Jane. As Bertha moves forward, the group begins to retreat.
If I was Jane, I would be so upset. I would not want to ever talk to Mr. Rochester again. I seriously think I'd lock myself in my room and just cry.
And that is exactly what Jane did.
Jane cries in her bedroom because she feels like she's been betrayed. She does not want to talk to or see Mr. Rochester. She has no idea what to do and falls asleep crying.
So we end chapter 28 with Jane crying in her room and wondering what in the world she's supposed to do.
Chapter 27.
After falling asleep crying, Jane wakes up and immediately realizes she has to leave Thornfield. Jane leaves her bedroom, and Mr. Rochester speaks to her about Bertha and how she is not a wife to him. He begs her to move to France with him and live as his wife. She rejects the offer. She leaves him alone, and early the next morning she sneaks out to leave Thornfield Hall.
At the end of chapter 27, Jane is stepping into a coach after deciding to leave Thornfield. Though her conscience tells her she is correct, she is truly heartbroken. Chapter 28.
The coach dropped Jane off in a land called Whitcross. She had absolutely nothing. She was cold and hungry. She searched for some kind of help and wandered into a village. She walked into a baker's shop where she was embarrassed of her state. In the end, she realized the baker seemed tired of her questions and felt almost forced to leave. The day passed on, and Jane became increasingly ill. She spent a night alone outside. The night dragged on, and she saw a light in the distance, and this was her last chance to sleep somewhere. She practically dragged herself to the house. She peeked into the window and saw 3 ladies and knocked on the door. She was turned away, and she wept on the doorstep.
Poor Jane, she's locked out of the house. I can't believe the maid wouldn't even let her in.
Well, the maid must have tracked her mistresses since there's no man in the house.
I wonder what's going to happen to Jane.
A man approached her and offered her a place in their home to rest. Jane finds out this man is Mr. St. John, and she follows him inside.
At the end of chapter 28, Jane is taken to the St. John home and given some food to eat. When she is asked her name, she replies, "Jane Elliot." After these few words, she is exhausted, and the siblings decide to send her to the upstairs bedroom for her to rest. Chapter 29.
Jane wakes up after 3 days of rest. She knew people had been coming to her room, but she did not talk to them. Jane went downstairs to find Hannah in the kitchen. Almost immediately after coming down, Hannah asked Jane if she had gone begging before coming to their house. Jane was insulted and began to explain she was a learned girl, and Hannah should not judge people based on if they have brass, because as a Christian she should not see poverty as a crime. Hannah apologized, and from then on they became quite good friends. Wow, so Hannah and Jane are like friends now, even though Hannah tried to kick Jane out of the house?
Yeah, I know, but hopefully Jane and St. John's relationship will go just as well.
The siblings return home and move into the parlor. There Jane studies Mr. St. John closely. She then proceeds to tell him about her life because he told her that he could not help her if he didn't know her. He asks her many questions. She tells him most of the things about her, but left out all about Mr. Rochester. She even admits that Jane Elliot is not her true name, but doesn't reveal what is. Finally, Mr. St. John promises Jane that he will try to help her find a job in any way that he can.
At the end of chapter 29, Mr. St. John assures Jane that he will try to find a job for her. This makes Jane feel less of a burden on the Rivers family. Chapter 30.
Jane's friendship with Mary and Diana continues to grow. They like to read the same things and enjoy spending time together, but Jane knows they will be leaving in a month, and so she approaches Mr. St. John. She inquires if he has heard of any service that she can offer herself to undertake. He tells her that he had found something for her 3 weeks ago, but because his sisters enjoyed being around her so much, he did not think it was necessary to tell her until they left. After much pre-information, Mr. St. John finally tells Jane that the job is being a mistress in the school village of Morton.
At the end of chapter 30, Jane has left for Morton and plans to open the school in a week. But before she left, the Rivers realized their uncle had passed away. Let's see how the new school works out for Jane. Chapter 31.
Jane begins to teach at the school and feels a bit down, even a little degraded. She has 20 students and only 3 can write. She talks about how some of her students are unmannered, but others are excited to learn. At the end of the long day, Mr. St. John comes to talk to her. He gives her a parcel from his sisters and asks Jane about her first day. He commends her for staying away from temptations and continues to tell her how sometimes it was hard for him to be in the ministry, but once he resolved to be a priest, it became easier. I can't believe Mr. St. John told Jane that he had trouble being in the ministry. He seems like such a serious guy.
Maybe he has a distraction that is keeping him from being so committed to the ministry.
As Mr. St. John turned to leave, he heard a voice, and out came the beautiful figure of Miss Oliver. Jane used the words perfect beauty to describe her. Jane watched as Miss Oliver and Mr. St. John talked and their reactions, and she concluded that Mr. St. John was in love with her.
At the end of chapter 31, Jane has begun her new job. Amongst all new things, she also believes she has learned about a new romance between Mr. St. John and Miss Oliver. Though he does not show it, she believes it's still there. Chapter 32.
After some time, Jane begins to feel accepted in her school. Her students respect her, and she respects them. She believes she has become a sort of favorite in the neighborhood. Her students begin to truly love her, and they are actually very smart and hardworking. She was well liked by almost everyone and felt accepted. Miss Oliver also came to visit Jane frequently. Though Jane was at many times content with this new life, she still had thoughts of Mr. Rochester in the dark of night. As unsure as Jane was about her love life, she grew more and more sure of the feelings between St. John and Miss Oliver. If I was Jane, I don't think I would be able to really forget Mr. Rochester, even though things seem good that she's in her new area and she has her new job and stuff. I don't think she feels completely fulfilled without Mr. Rochester there.
Yeah, she really wants to push the memory of him away, but love leaves a lasting impact.
Though Jane is content in what she is doing, when she is in bed she has strange and vivid dreams of Mr. Rochester and her life at Thornfield. He seems to be engraved in her heart. She cannot forget him, even in her state of comfort that she's in. Her dreams are romantic and adventurous. She falls in love with him all over again every night. But then she wakes up and remembers where she is and that her existence is not for him, but for the school. I feel bad for Jane that she misses Mr. Rochester so much, but I'm glad that she's found a good friend in Miss Oliver.
Yeah, and their friendship continues to grow.
One day when Miss Oliver came to visit Jane, she asked Jane to paint a portrait of her so she could show her papa. Jane was so excited to paint such a gorgeous and willing model. One day Jane was working on the portrait, entranced, when Mr. St. John walked in. He looked at the portrait and was a bit shocked. Jane continues on to ask him if the portrait is like and actually looks like Miss Oliver. Eventually he tells her it is very well done. Then Jane offers to paint him a duplicate. They continue talking about the fantasy of Mr. St. John and Miss Oliver being together, but eventually Mr. St. John leaves after expressing that Miss Oliver is truly beautiful, but they will never be together because she's not going to be a good minister's wife.
At the end of chapter 32, Mr. St. John leaves Jane in a most peculiar way. He tears a piece of her parchment, and Jane doesn't know why he does this, but quickly forgets about it. She believes St. John and herself are now able to confide in one another.
I love this story. I can't wait to see what happens next. I just love the romance. I really hope Jane and Mr. Rochester get back together because they would just be like the cutest couple, and he seems so chill and so cool.
Yeah, but Mr. St. John is supposed to be really cute, so I guess we'll just see what happens.
True. Jane's got a lot of options.
I know.
Finished.